podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Paddock and the Pavilion with Stephen Wallace. In each show, Stephen will interview someone connected to the world of horse racing or cricket.
On today's podcast, we have a fascinating story for you about the flying filly Fifinella, who won the Derby in 1916, a painting based on a cigarette card and a log cabin with beautiful views in Herefordshire. Coming up soon on the Paddock and the Pavilion, you will be hearing 3 stories about Royal Ascot, along with Ashes memories from Rick McCosker, Dennis Amiss and Richard Ellison. But for this episode, I began talking to Sarah Childs, the great-granddaughter of Fifinella's jockey, Joe Childs. Hello, Sarah and Zac. Welcome to the Paddock and the Pavilion.
Hello,
Stephen. Very nice of you to invite us. Thank you.
This must be your first ever podcast.
It certainly is, yes. Definitely so.
Well, I like stories, and on this podcast, with the Derby only a few days away, yours fitted the bill: a family connection, a painting of a previous famous winner, and a log cabin. All will be revealed. Let's set the scene. Sarah, you are the great-granddaughter of Joe Childs, royal jockey and a 3-time winner of the Derby.
That's correct.
What did you know about Joe Childs when you were growing up?
Well, I'm not a great deal, but one of my main memories is going to stay with my grandparents and seeing memorabilia around the house. And they actually had a hoof belonging to the racehorse Scuttle, who was one of King George V's horses, and Grandpa Joe had ridden that horse to win the 1,000 guineas. So it was a very important race for Grandpa Joe, and I think it was the only classic that King George V won as an owner. And so he was presented with the hoof of Scuttle, see when Scuttle died, and that's my big memory really, and what kind of sparked my interest in what did Grandpa Joe do then. So that was one of the things that I remember most of all, and then lots of other trophies around the house and paintings on the wall as well. So my grandfather John used to talk to me about Grandpa Joe and tell me a little bit of history, and took us when we were a little bit younger to have a look at their old house, their old stables and old school. So lots of stories. But my grandfather, John, absolutely hated horses. And he would say that Grandpa Joe used to make him ride to school on a pony, but he hated it. So, yes, those are my memories, really. But obviously, I didn't ever get to meet Grandpa Joe, sadly, because he died in 1958, so long before I was around.
But your mum must have met him.
Not mum, my dad, on my dad's side. And, Dad did. Sadly, my dad's not around anymore, so I didn't get to chat to him about it very much. But he was quite young when Grandpa Joe died as well. So he was only about 9 years old. So he and his brother don't have many memories, sadly, that they can think of Grandpa Joe. But yeah, we've lost a few family members, sadly, who would remember. But I have spoken to a cousin, Jeff, and he was a teenager when Grandpa Joe was around. So he has more memories of travelling around to him and going to stay in France with him. And spending time with him.
Why was he born in Chantilly in France?
Well, I think it was all to do with racing, and because his father was a jockey as well. So I think I'm not entirely sure why he was born there, but I believe it was related to the fact that they were racing over there. And I know that Grandpa Joe spent a lot of time in France and Germany to do with weight, because he was quite a tall jockey, and I think the weight restrictions were less severe in France and Germany, so he spent more time over there initially.
And Zac, you've got to hear about this through Sarah.
Well, yeah, when I met Sarah just over 7 years ago, I didn't know anything about this, but there's a picture on the wall. Actually, I'll just show it to you here. I don't know whether you can see the picture. That is Joe standing next to the king, basically. And I just asked her about that picture, and then she told me some of the history that, from everything she knew, and the Derby winners, Fifinella, Gainsborough, Coronac, and we've just been exploring it a bit as we've been building our holiday cabins, really. That's it.
Right, we also have other guests on this podcast. We've got the equine artist Emily Johnson, the resident artist at Cheltenham Racecourse, and Tim Cox from the Cox Library. And I spoke to Tim earlier to fill in some of the gaps. You've done quite well there, Sarah, about Joe's racing career.
Joe Charles was one of the important great jockeys of the 20th century. I've gone back to the book that Tony Morris and John Randall produced, A Century of Champions, and they rate him or rank him as the 11th most important successful jockey of the 20th century. So I think that puts him up there with Lester Piggott, Scobie Breesley, Gordon Richards, Steve Donahue, so jockeys that are well known still. He goes back to being born in Chantilly, and his early career was very much on the continent, in France, a spell in Italy, then on to Germany, partly because he had weight problems. And then he comes to England at the start of the First World War, comes to England to continue his career in the First World War. And then that gets off to a good start by riding Fifinella in the Derby and the Oaks in 1916.
It must have been a very prestigious role to be the jockey for the king.
Yes, it was. And it was a role that he took seriously. His reputation was as somewhat quarrelsome, short-tempered man, and often didn't get on well with trainers and owners, particularly in the early part of his career. But he fell into the role of the king's jockey and held the job for 10 years until he retired, from about 1925 to 1935, so 10 years as the royal jockey.
And he rode a classic winner for King George V.
Yes, that was Scuttle in the 1,000 Guineas, wasn't it? So, yes, he did win the classic, but I think he was just an established jockey riding well for the king.
And when he was riding Scuttle to win the 1,000 Guineas for King George V, who was the trainer and where was the trainer based?
Well, it was William Jarvis, who was based at Newmarket. And he always rode on very cordial terms with Jarvis, which was a contrast to relationships with some of the trainers, both in France and England, which were, I think, could be described as tense.
Tim, I've got to ask you, because Sarah asked me to ask you this question. Have you got Joe Charles' book?
I do have his autobiography, My Racing Reminiscences. It's one of the early biographies of jockeys. It's quite interesting, just having set out to collect all the biographies of horses, jockeys, trainers, and so on. How few there were before Charles published his. I think it was in 1952. So he was an early jockey biography.
Sarah, we need to explain to listeners about the log cabin, the Fifinella retreat, and its connection to the Derby. Can you fill us in?
Well, we wanted to build some cabins, and we really wanted to try and connect them to horses somehow, because I've always been involved in horses. I learnt to ride when I was 5 years old at Newbury Riding School, and did some show jumping and then got into dressage eventually when I was a little bit older. And we had a riding school here in Herefordshire and a livery yard. So we've been quite heavily involved in horses. And not so much now, it's more of a hobby for me now, but we wanted to try and keep the connection and theme the cabins somehow. And we just thought it would be really nice to connect to Grandpa Joe and the racing, because there's, I'm quite proud of what Grandpa Joe achieved, and it's really nice to try and showcase some of that. So that was our idea. We thought about, we may have 3 cabins in total, so we thought it might be nice to go for Derby winners, as there were 3 of those. So hence why we started with Fifinella.
Yeah, that was the first one, so that was the obvious choice to start with, and that's when we came up with that one.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned Fifinella. We no one seems to know whether it's Fifinella. I'm sure someone will put us right, but
hopefully.
I also asked Tim all about the Flying Filly who won the Derby and the Oaks in 1916. Tim, Fifinella has a special place in the history of the Derby.
Yes, she does. She's one of 6 fillies that have won the Derby, but you have to go back to 1916 for her win. It's over 100 years since that happened. But we've only had 16 runners since 1900 that were fillies in the Derby. So it's a rare occurrence that a trainer and an owner think they've got a horse that is good enough to run in the Derby and have a chance. I did go back over the whole history of the Derby. There've only been 63 fillies running in the Derby. 6 of them have won. So you've got a 10% winning record even now, of fillies winning the Derby if they're in there running.
Since Fifinella won the Derby as a filly in 1916, which filly has been closest since?
Well, as I said, there were very few fillies that have run in the Derby. The closest was Nobility in 1975, where she finished second. So that is probably the most significant run of a filly in the Derby since 1916.
Talking about the painting, which is now in the log cabin, why did you come to choose Emily Johnson?
Well, that's down to me, really. I had a colleague at school where I was teaching, and Emily was a good friend of hers, and she happened to mention that she was an equine artist. And so I said, well, could we have her contact details? And we got in touch with Emily and explained our situation. And she was delighted to take on a commission. It was an interesting one for her because she was used to having horses where she'd go and visit the live horse, take some photos and paint the horse with the photos she'd taken. And we were saying, well, we haven't got the horse. We've only got cigarette cards and black and white photographs, and also we'd like the jockey on there. And that was a challenge to her as well, because she wasn't really painting at that time with people on the horses. So I think it was a new area for her to look at as well. I think it was a challenge that she enjoyed, and we're delighted with what she's produced.
Well, let's hear what Emily had to say about the challenge of painting a horse from a cigarette card.
My initial thoughts were I was probably a bit apprehensive, because one of the problems that artists have is not very good quality reference photos being given to. So often I kind of insist with clients that I will go and take the photos and meet the horse myself. So when I was told that this horse had been dead for 80 years or something, I was a bit concerned. Well, no, more than 100 years, is it?
The filly died in 1931, I think, top of my head.
Oh, okay. Yeah, not quite then. But so I was like, oh no. But I did think it sounded really interesting. I find research products quite interesting. So I was kind of intrigued and also a bit apprehensive. I thought, I can't promise anything, but we'll see what happens.
So how big was the image that you received?
Oh, I don't know. Well, it was a scan of a cigarette card. So what are they? Probably like 2 inches by less than an inch, probably. They're kind of long and thin and small. And so it was a scan of that. So it had just been blown up. And yeah, so and when you see them blown up, they're all like little made up of dots. You can see all the dots of how it was printed. So yes, so the quality wasn't there to kind of do a painting from. So I thought, right, well, maybe I can, find out what the filly look like and all the markings, and maybe I can do a painting from another horse, like go to one of my local yards or one of my connections, and I can use another horse, maybe do it that way. So that was kind of one of my ideas, but I thought I'd do a bit of research and see what I could find.
But how did you go about painting something so small?
Well, so I kind of, went on research, and I started looking for photographs. So I could see the cigarette card, and I could see the jockey silks and the colours and the colour of the horse and the markings. And that was all I kind of had. But yeah, so I went down the route of looking for photographs. Yeah, and luckily I came across, I'd kind of been looking, and they were all very grainy and black and white, and I was kind of like, oh no, these aren't going to be good enough. But luckily, just kind of late one night, I managed to come across a good quality scan of the photo that they must have used when they created the cigarette card, because it was exactly the same pose, the legs were in the same position and everything. So it was the photograph that they'd used, and I was just like, oh, bingo, like I can use that. I could use the detail and the shape of the horse. I could get kind of her proportions from it. And then just for the colours, I did have to kind of go from the cigarette card and then from other chestnut mares, really. So yeah, you can't be 100% that I got like the exact red right, but but no one's gonna know. other than Joe Charles, but obviously he's no longer here. So yeah, no, it was a really interesting project, and it turned out, I can't believe how well the painting turned out. It was, really pleased with it, and pleased for Zac and Sarah.
You also had to get the silks of the jockey, Joe Charles.
Yes, yeah. So it was orange and light blue, I think, wasn't it? Or yellow and light blue. And that was quite important. I did have to kind of cross-reference a little bit to just kind of check I got that right. But yeah, of course, all of those photos were black and white as well. So I couldn't use photographs. I had to kind of go by a few other things just to check I got them right. But yeah, exactly. Quite important, that.
How long did it take to do?
So my oil paintings, you do them in stages, and so I did it over maybe four months or something like that. But I'm not sure how many hours. Probably most of my paintings are kind of over 50 hours, 100 hours, something like that. How
big size-wise is the painting?
I think it's 70 centimeters by 50 centimeters. So not quite a meter. Probably like maybe similar to a TV, most people's flat screen TVs, something like that. Yeah, so it's a nice size. I like painting bigger rather than smaller. It gives you chance to work, and you can really see the brush strokes, and yeah.
Emily Johnson's painting of Fifinella is based on a cigarette card. They were very popular at that time.
I think it's one of the interesting things about the popularity of racing. If you study cigarette cards, there were about 5,000 sets of cigarette cards produced between 1900 or about 1900 and about 1955. And many of them were using sports stars, sports celebrities, jockeys, racehorses, racing scenes, and so on, as themes for the collectors to collect. Cigarette cards go back to the late 19th century in America. They originally started as being printed on pack, and then eventually moved to being a loose insert in the pack. And they were part of the marketing operation for cigarette brands in the early part of the 20th century. You encouraged people to smoke, to collect the cards in the sets, and it was quite a war to select the subjects that you were going to put into your cigarette card sets. And if you come to the library, Stephen, you'll see thousands of cards from the various racing sets worldwide. They come from America, Australia, Venezuela, France, Germany, and of course, England and Ireland.
Well, we've got it on audio now, Tim, in a podcast, so I must come to the library.
Yes, you've been avoiding it for so long.
What did you think of the end result of the painting?
It was lovely, actually. It was so nice to have the painting of Grandpa Joe on Fifinella in the cabin, and it's a real statement piece in the cabin because it's a Scandinavian style design inside, so it's quite minimalistic. So it's the only thing really that you've got on the wall in the cabin. So it really stands out, and it's great. Yeah, we're really pleased with it.
Yeah, it's delighted, and it's always creates a conversation with our guests, which is nice, and then talk about the history. And some people are real racing fans, and and come here to really enjoy that because they've seen the name and they realise there's a connection there. So that's really nice as well.
And Zac, you helped build the cabin, I understand.
Yes, got a good friend called Adam Thomas, who's really, let's just say, he's a master craftsman, and I'm his lackey really. So I do what he tells me to do. But we both built it together, and in the process of building the second one now. And we've been really, really pleased and had great feedback from our guests and everyone who's come to stay.
Yeah, tell us a bit more about the inside of the cabin, and apparently from what Emily said, there's some fantastic views.
Yes, it's beautiful. There's a massive frontage with very large windows that looks out to the Black Mountains, the Brecon Beacons, and if people know the local area, Garway Hill. And it just captures that view through there. And just waking up in the morning, being able to open the blinds, lying in bed, looking at that view is quite stunning and definitely very relaxing.
It's a relaxing
really,
space.
Yeah, It's a really nice space to come and chill. And we'd invite anyone to come along, of course.
And it's for two people.
Two and two. Bring two children as well. There's a den area, and the children can stay in that. Otherwise, there's just a nice bed, a comfortable bed for two people. Yeah.
I think Emily has actually seen it, but she's not stayed there.
No, we hope she will in the future when she gets a chance. She just seems too busy at the moment. But yes, we invited her to the opening when it was completed, and so she could see the picture in its place. And I think she was delighted.
Well, I asked her earlier in the week what she thought of the Fifinella retreat.
And yeah, it's a really beautiful lodge, and it's really interesting, the kind of design of it. They've got kind of little snug room, and it's all kind of Scandinavian. It's really cool the way that they've designed it, all the kind of woods. It's all very wood inside, and then just beautiful views, a big giant glass window where you can see out across the fields. Yeah, so it's cozy. But also, amazing views. And they've got a kind of a log-fired hot tub outside. They've got, it's really cool. I was like, oh, I definitely want to stay here.
Oh, that's my next question. Are you planning to go and stay there one day?
Yeah, I think I should one day. Yeah, no, it would be a nice retreat. So, yeah, I definitely should.
You've also got a hot tub there.
Yes, definitely. That's very popular. We always offer it to guests, and I haven't had many people refusing to take up the offer. Yeah, it's really nice wood-fired hot tub sitting outside under an oak tree, and it's a nice place to be in the evening as the sun's setting.
And how have bookings been going?
Really good, actually. We when we first opened a couple of years ago, it was just after COVID lockdowns, and there were travel restrictions abroad, and I think we had 95% occupancy, which was absolutely amazing. Obviously, it's dropped away a little bit then as foreign travel's opened up, but we're still happy it's about 60 or 70%. And we're really delighted with it. It's been perfect.
And you've got plans for more. Have you started the second one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're well through the second one, actually. We're just having the windows fitted now today. That'll complete. We'll be putting the roof on and have it nice and watertight, and we hope to get it completely furnished and finished ready for the end of September.
And that's going to be called Gainsborough after Joe's second Derby win in 1918.
That's correct, yes. And we've also commissioned a painting of Gainsborough with Emily, so we're looking forward to seeing that as well.
Yes, so just at the very beginning of the process, and that will be Gainsborough. So that's another famous racehorse, and that will be the name of their second. They're going to build a second lodge, so that's very exciting. I'm not sure if I think it's going to be different. I don't think it's going to be like a carbon copy. I think it's going to be quite unique. So yeah, that'll be Gainsborough. So yeah, that's exciting.
And Sarah, you were mentioning about Gainsborough Stud, which you I think you'd been to.
Well, I haven't actually visited the stud itself, but very strangely, we used to live in a village called Walton Hill in Newbury, and that's when I was younger, growing up. And at the top of the hill, literally a couple of 100 metres away, there was a stud called the Harwood Stud. We didn't know anything about it at that stage, but since moving away from there, we realised it changed the name to Gainsborough Stud, and it is actually where Gainsborough stood and is now buried. So we were very close to that history without realising it.
Well, he's a very famous horse because Gainsborough was the sire of Hyperion, who won the Derby in 1933, and Hyperion's statue is outside the Jockey Club rooms in Newmarket.
I see. Yes.
Yeah, that's going to be worth a visit then soon.
And Sarah, there's a connection with Disney, with Fifinella.
Yeah, so basically, Roald Dahl's first children's book is a book called The Gremlins. And the female character in the book, he chose to name Fifinella's after the horse, the flying filly, Fifinella. And Walt Disney got hold of this story. He was really interested in it, and he was interested in making a film. I don't think the film ever came off in the end, but Disney did do the illustrations for the book in the end.
Yeah, and also there's another connection there with the Second World War. The United States Air Force female pilots were nicknamed the Flying Fillies, and Walt Disney designed their logo for them, for their uniforms. So, that was another connection to the Fifinella story as well.
Some very interesting connections there. Do we know why Dahl called his character Fifinella?
Well, I believe that she won the Derby in the year that he was born. And because she was known as the Flying Filly, and of course he was in the Air Force at the time, I think that's maybe why he chose the name.
Yeah, when he authored his first book, he signed it as a Flight Lieutenant Roald Dahl. So he was still just come out of the Air Force, and that's pretty much the first thing he wrote.
Sarah, as the great granddaughter of Joe Childs, have you been to the Derby?
I've never been to the Derby. I haven't. I'd love to go sometime, but the closest I've been to the Derby was to a conference at the racecourse, but I haven't actually made it to the Derby itself.
It's definitely on the to-do list very shortly.
When you finish the third cabin, there's going to be 3, isn't there?
Well, there might be. we've got planning permission for 2, and if we thought in the future we had back in mind we might consider a third, and obviously that would be called Coronac after the third Derby winner. So yeah,
that's in 1926, which that race was at Epsom, and you can catch, as we spoke earlier, you can catch movie tone film without sound of Joe's win in 1926.
Yeah,
yes,
absolutely. That's amazing to watch, the sort of pathé film and in the black and white, and imagine the atmosphere that's going on there as you see the race. It's fantastic.
Looks like they were getting the weather we've been having recently on that day as well, though. Yes,
it did look a very wet day.
I think Grandpa Joe did comment that the horse ran away with him on that day as well, so that might have helped with the win.
You found that in his book.
Thank you very much for joining me on the Paddock and the Pavilion to talk about Joe Childs, his Derby wins, the painting of Fifinella, and also the log cabin, which you can book easily on the internet.
Yes, if you put into any search engine Fifinella Retreat, it should come out at the top, and it'll take you through to a website where you'll be able to book. And hopefully we'll be launching our own website soon, and that'll also be another opportunity. But we invite anyone to come along and enjoy the history.
Well, thank you both very much, Sarah and Zac, for joining me on the Paddock and the Pavilion, and also special thanks to Emily Johnson and Tim Cox.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
Thank you for listening to The Paddock and the Pavilion. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at The Pad and Pav. Don't forget, if you like the show, please do leave us a rating and review.
Sports Social Podcast Network.